The firefighters arrived first. A patrol officer driving past an "I can't believe it's yogurt" shop on North Loop Boulevard in Austin, Texas at approximately 12:45 in the morning on December 6, 1991, saw flames coming through the front of the building and called it in. The store had been closed for hours. There was no reason for anyone to be inside. It looked, from the street, like a late-night commercial fire. The kind that gets attributed to electrical faults or grease and takes a few hours to contain. When firefighters went inside, they found 4 teenage girls. Jennifer Harbison was 17. Her sister Sarah was 15. Their friend Eliza Thomas was 17. Their younger friend Amy Ayers was 13. All 4 of them worked at the yogurt shop. Jennifer and Eliza had been closing that night. Sarah and Amy had stopped by to wait for a ride home. All 4 of them had been shot in the head. All 4 of them had been sexually assaulted. Their hands had been bound with their own clothing. The fire had been set deliberately, not to destroy the building, but to destroy what had happened inside it. The fire failed. The evidence survived. Austin, in December 1991, was not a city accustomed to crimes of this nature. It was a university town, liberal and young, a place that had built an identity around music and culture, and a certain kind of Texas eccentricity, the yogurt shop murders. That phrase became attached to the case almost immediately and never left. Hit the city with the specific force of something that doesn't belong to the place it happened. 4 girls, one night, a shop that teenagers went to after school. The investigation that followed was, in the first years, the largest in Austin Police Department history. Hundreds of tips, dozens of interviews, a $200,000 reward that produced nothing actionable. Investigators worked the case hard and came up with nothing that held. The girls were 17, 15, 17, and 13. The evidence at the scene told investigators that what had happened was planned, not opportunistic, not random in its execution, but organized around a specific sequence of events. The binding, the assaults, the shots, the fire. Investigators developed a profile of someone who had done this before, or who had thought about it in detailed terms before this night. Someone organized, someone who had a plan. For 8 years, no one was arrested. In 1999, 8 years after the murders, 4 young men were arrested and charged. Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, Maurice Pierce, Forrest Wellborn. They had been teenagers in Austin in 1991, 16 and 17 years old when the girls died. They had known each other. They had been in the general vicinity of the store in the period around the murders, according to investigators, and 2 of them, Scott and Springsteen, had given confessions. The confessions were the centerpiece of the prosecution. Without physical evidence connecting any of the 4 men to the crime scene, the case against them rested heavily on what Scott and Springsteen had said in interview rooms to investigators who had questioned them over extended sessions, using techniques that their attorneys would later characterize as coercive. The interrogations had lasted for hours. The men had been young, teenagers at the time of the crime, young adults at the time of their arrests. The specific methods used, the psychological pressure applied, the degree to which the confessions reflected genuine knowledge of the crimes versus details investigators had supplied, became the central debate of the legal proceedings that followed. Both men recanted almost immediately after signing. They said they had been pressured. manipulated, told what to say, fed specific details they could not otherwise have known because they had not been there. They said the confessions were false. Prosecutors said the confessions were voluntary. Jurors, presented with the confessions and the gravity of what had been done to 4 teenage girls in 1991, convicted. Springsteen was convicted of capital murder in June 2001 and sentenced to death. Scott was convicted of capital murder in September 2002, together with Pierce and Wellborn, who had been charged but not yet tried. 4 young men who had been teenagers at the time of the murders were nows, the official answer to a case that Austin had been waiting a decade to resolve. The answer was wrong. By 2007, appellate courts had overturned both convictions. Springsteen's attorneys had successfully argued that his trial had been unfair. Scott's attorneys argued that his prior conviction had been used improperly to prejudice the jury in his case. New trials were ordered for both. And then, in 2009, the district attorney dropped all charges. The reason was DNA, new testing, specifically YSTR testing, which isolates male DNA from mixed samples and was not available in the same form at the time of the original investigation, had been applied to biological evidence recovered from the crime scene. The results excluded all 4 men. The DNA recovered from the scene of the yogurt shop murders did not belong to Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, Maurice Pierce, or Forrest Wellborn. None of them had been there. 4 young men had spent years of their lives. In Scott's case, years of marriage, the early years of his daughter's life, his entire young adulthood, under arrest, under indictment, in prison, or under the shadow of charges that the DNA evidence had now directly contradicted. Springsteen had been on death row. He had been scheduled to die for a crime he had not committed. Pierce, who had struggled with mental illness in the years after his arrest, died in 2010 when he was shot by a police officer during a confrontation in which he had tried to stab them. He was 34 years old. He died without being cleared. The exoneration he should have received came 16 years after his death. The case went cold again, more completely this time. The DNA said it was not the 4 men. The DNA pointed toward someone. That someone had no match in any database the investigators had access to. For the next 15 years, detectives worked the case on the margins of their regular duties, running the unknown DNA profile against new database entries as they became available, applying new technology as it developed, waiting for a match that didn't come. The profile from the fingernail of Amy Ayers, recovered at the original scene, preserved across 3 decades of storage, was the thread the investigation kept pulling. In the early 2020s, cold case detective Dan Jackson took primary responsibility for the yogurt shop case. He applied for and received funding for additional forensic testing. He worked with a laboratory in Houston on ballistics analysis. The specific type of pistol used to kill one of the girls had been identified, and Jackson began running the ballistics signature through a federal firearms database, looking for a match to a weapon that had been used or recovered elsewhere. He found one, a pistol recovered from a stolen car at a border checkpoint near El Paso, Texas, on December 8, 1991. 2 days after the yogurt shop murders, had ballistics characteristics consistent with the weapon used in Austin. The car had been stolen. The man stopped at the checkpoint had been arrested briefly and released. His name was Robert Eugene Brashers. Jackson ran Brashers. What came back was a profile of a man who had been moving across the country, committing sexual assaults and murders for years. He had a conviction for a 1990 murder in South Carolina. He had been implicated in other crimes across multiple states. He was organized, mobile, and he targeted young women in enclosed spaces. He set fires to destroy evidence. His method of binding victims with their own clothing had appeared in other cases. The specific signature of what he did, the sequencing, the fire, the binding, appeared consistently across different states and different years. He had been caught before. He had been released before. He had kept going, and he had died in 1999. Shot himself during a standoff with police at a motel in Kennett, Missouri, taking with him whatever he knew about Austin and whatever he had done on the night of December 5th, 1991. Nobody had been looking for him in connection with Texas. Nobody had connected the border checkpoint to the yogurt shop. He had simply died, and the case had remained open. And the 4 men who had been wrongfully convicted had lived under the weight of it for years. He had never been questioned about Austin. Jackson sent the DNA profile from Amy Ayers' fingernail to be compared against a sample connected to Brashers through the South Carolina conviction. In September 2025, the Austin Police Department held a press conference. Austin Police Chief Lisa Davis stood at the podium. After 34 years, she said, the Austin Police had made a significant breakthrough. Robert Eugene Brashers. He had been in Austin on December 5th, 1991. He had been stopped at a border checkpoint 2 days later with a gun and a stolen car. He had been living the life of a man who moved and killed, and moved again for most of a decade. And he had died in a motel parking lot in Missouri in 1999, 25 years before anyone found his name in a database and connected it to a yogurt shop on North Loop Boulevard on February 19, 2026. 34 years, 2 months and 13 days after the fire, Travis County Judge Dana Blasey declared Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn factually innocent. She said the words directly into the record, "You are innocent." 3 of the 4 men were alive to hear it. Pierce was not. Scott spoke in court that day. He said he had been married for 1 year, and his daughter had been 3 years old when he was arrested in 1999. He said, when he was finally released, the relationship with his wife wasn't there anymore. He said, for decades he had carried the weight of a crime he did not commit. He said, no court ruling could return the years and the love that had been taken from him, but it could acknowledge the truth. In May 2026, the city of Austin agreed to pay $35 million to be split among the 4 men, or in Pierce's case, his estate. The settlement was the accounting of what the system had cost them. It did not account for Pierce dying in 2010, under a cloud that the exoneration lifted only after he was gone. The families of the 4 girls have been present throughout the case's entire arc: the original investigation, the arrests, the convictions, the overturned convictions, the DNA testing, the years of nothing, the Brashers identification, the exoneration. They have had to hold, simultaneously, the grief of losing their daughters and sisters, and the specific grief of watching the legal process fail in the ways it failed. The Harbison family lost 2 daughters in the same night. They have attended more hearings and press conferences about this case than most families ever face for a single loss. The name Robert Eugene Brashers cannot be prosecuted. He is dead. He has been dead since 1999. He killed 4 girls in Austin on December 5th, 1991, set a fire he believed would erase the evidence, and left. He drove to El Paso. He was stopped at a border crossing with a stolen car and a pistol, and he talked his way out of it and kept going. He committed other crimes. He shot himself in a motel parking lot in Missouri 8 years after the yogurt shop. For 26 years after his death, his name meant nothing in Austin. And then a detective ran a ballistics signature through a database. And the database returned a car at a border checkpoint. And the car returned a name. And the name returned a DNA profile. And the DNA profile matched the fingernail of a 13-year-old girl who had been killed in a yogurt shop in 1991. Jennifer Harbison was 17. Sarah was 15. Eliza Thomas was 17. Amy Ayers was 13. They were shot in the head, and the building was set on fire. And the fire was supposed to erase everything. It didn't erase the fingernail. That one preserved piece of biological material, recovered in 1991 and stored for 34 years, is what connected everything. The DNA under the fingernail of a 13-year-old girl outlasted the man who put it there. He died in a motel parking lot in Missouri, thinking he had gotten away with it. He had not gotten away with it. It just took 34 years for the evidence to say so out loud. There is something specific about the wrongful conviction phase of this case that the exoneration hearing in February 2026 brought into full relief. The 4 men, Scott, Springsteen, Pierce, Wellborn, had been teenagers in Austin in 1991. They were in the general social environment of young people who frequented the area. They had no physical connection to the crime scene. They had no motive that investigators ever fully articulated. What they had was proximity, youth, and, in the case of 2 of them, statements obtained through interrogation methods that appellate courts would eventually find problematic. The case against them was built on confession evidence from men who said they had been told what to confess to. The jury in 2001 and the jury in 2002 both heard those confessions and convicted. They did not hear the DNA evidence that would later exclude the 4 men. Because that technology applied in that way was not part of the trial record. They made decisions based on what they had and what they had included 2 young men saying they had been present when 4 girls were killed. The confessions, the recantations, the convictions, the overturned convictions, the charges dropped, the DNA exclusions, the years of open case, the Brashers identification, the formal exoneration. Each of these is a chapter in a case that lasted 34 years and produced outcomes that affected the lives of more people than the original crime itself. The 4 girls who died on December 5th, 1991, are the center of the case. But the case also produced 4 young men who lost years, marriages, freedom, and in Pierce's case, stability, and eventually his life, to a wrongful accusation that the system took a decade to begin correcting and another decade and a half to formally close. Michael Scott's daughter was 3 years old when he was arrested in 1999. She was grown by the time the judge said, "You are innocent," in a Travis County courtroom in 2026. He had missed most of her childhood. No settlement amount addresses that arithmetic. The investigation that finally produces identification was methodical, in the way that cold case detective work always is. patient, incremental, running parallel threads without knowing which one would produce results. Dan Jackson's decision to pursue the ballistics database was not guaranteed to work. The border checkpoint record from December 8, 1991 was not an obvious lead. The connection from a stolen car in El Paso to a yogurt shop in Austin required someone to look for it, and for the looking to intersect with the right database at the right time. That intersection happened in 2025. It could have happened earlier. It could have happened later. It could, in a different version of events, not have happened at all. Brashers could have been caught and convicted for one of his other crimes, and his DNA entered into the system years earlier, producing a match that would have resolved Austin in the 1990s or the 2000s. Or he could have died in Missouri in 1999, and the ballistics connection might never have surfaced, and the case might have remained open indefinitely. It didn't. The fingernail preserved what it preserved. The ballistics database contained what it contained. The detective looked where he looked, and 34 years after a fire on North Loop Boulevard was supposed to erase everything. The evidence that survived spoke. Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, Amy Ayers, 1715, 1713. The fire didn't erase them. It just took 34 years for everything the fire couldn't touch to say so clearly enough for a courtroom to hear. There is one more detail that belongs in the record of this case, and it is a detail about the cold case investigation itself, about what it looks like when a detective inherits a 30-year file and decides to keep pulling at it. Dan Jackson had been working cold cases for years before the yogurt shop file came to him. Cold case work is a specific kind of investigative discipline, slower than active investigations, less certain of result, built on the premise that the evidence in storage is not finished speaking even when the original investigation has run out of threads to follow. It requires a tolerance for years of work that produce nothing visible. It requires the ability to hold open a question that the institution around you would prefer to consider settled. Jackson knew the 4 men had been exonerated by DNA. He knew the DNA pointed to someone. He knew that someone had died in 1999 and had never been connected to Austin. He looked for the connection the way you look for something you're not certain exists. Systematically, through every available database, every available record, every available comparison. The ballistics database that returned the border checkpoint record was not where most investigators would have looked first. Firearms signatures from a 1991 crime matched to a weapon recovered in a stolen car 2 days later and hundreds of miles away. That connection required believing that the gun recovered at the border was the gun used in Austin, and that the person carrying it 2 days after the murders was the person who had committed them. Jackson believed it. He ran it. The record came back. The name came back. The DNA confirmed it. 34 years. The Harbison family lost 2 daughters in the same building on the same night. They have been present at every significant development, in this case, for more than 3 decades. They attended the original investigation. They attended the arrests. They attended the convictions. They attended the overturned convictions. They attended the DNA exclusions and the dropped charges. They attended the years of open case. They attended the Brashers identification press conference in September 2025. They attended the exoneration hearing. in February 2026. Whatever the press conference gave them, and whatever the exoneration gave them, justice, in the sense of a reckoning with the specific person responsible, was not available. Robert Eugene Brashers shot himself in Missouri in 1999. He is not in a prison. He is not in a courtroom. He is not available to be asked the questions that the Harbison family and the Thomas family and the Ayers family have been carrying for 34 years. What they have is the record, his name in it, the DNA that confirmed it. The judge who said the 4 men were innocent and meant that the real answer was finally in the file. The fire was supposed to erase everything. The DNA under a fingernail survived 34 years in an evidence storage facility and outlasted the man who left it there. That is the yogurt shop case. That is what 34 years looks like when the evidence doesn't give up.